the final solution to the Roy Orbison mystery and isn't good. Roy Orbison's birth name was Roy on April 23, 1936, Kelton Orbison in Texas's Vernon. Early in life, Orbison was characterized by perseverance and adversity. Growing up in a working household during Great Depression's latter stages, Roy's interest in music began at a young age. At age 6 he received his first guitar, and at the age of 8, performing on local radio. His parents encouraged him to follow his Roy found strength and comfort in his passion in the field of music, a medium that heckled convey feelings that were frequently left unsaid in daily life. Among the early musical inspirations were pop stars like Hank Williams and country singers like Bing Crosby, as well as the Southern gospel with a bluesy feel. Following relocating to Wink, Texas, with his family, Orbison kept refining his musical persona, ultimately creating his initial Wink Westerners, a band. While yet in high school, these early years refined his stage presence and composing abilities. Creating a foundation for a revolutionary career. Orbison's the late 1950s saw a break when he joined Memphis Sun Records. The Elvis Presley was first released by the same label, Jerry Lee Lewis and Johnny Cash. However, his initial rockabilly singles were greeted by a strict achievement. It wasn't until he changed their name to Monument Records from early 1960s when he finally discovered his path artistically and literally. With producer Fred's direction, Orbison and Foster created a sound that combined aspects of pop, rock, country, and classical styles combined surrounding his 3-octave soaring voice. His breakout single, Only That, the 1960 film Lonely, laid the groundwork for a series many ballads with strong emotional content that become his defining characteristic. Songs such as Crying, Dreaming, Running, Scared, and its overexpressed a feeling of romantic hopelessness and vulnerability that was almost unreveled in modern music. His 1964's most famous hit, Oh Pretty Woman, demonstrated his capacity for blending swaggering through pain, protecting his reputation as a pioneer in music and global celebrity. Roy Orbison's unique qualities were not just his voice's strength, but the genuineness and profundity of his lyrics. At era when rock and roll were frequently on a radiothful carelessness and disobedience, Orbison sang of heartbreaking loneliness, lost love, and dashed hopes. His songs struck a chord with listeners worldwide who recognized in his music a mirror of their personal grief and aspects. His look, wearing all black, silent behind his signature dark glasses, which increased his mystique and led to he is frequently referred to as the Caruso Afrak or the Large O. Despite his popularity in the 1970s, Orbison never stopped performing and recording. An incredible career comeback occurred in starting with a new generation in the 1980s, soft musicians mentioning him as a key impact. He was admitted in 1987 to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, as well as Bruce in the Songwriters Hall of Fame, Bob Dylan, and Springsteen lauding him as one of the best voices in history to grace the airways. During the same decade, Orbison went back to the recording as well. Studio and caused a stir with a moving and exquisitely composed duet named That Feeling of Loving You Again, captured on tape alongside the well-known country rock performer Ema. The tune, which included Lucia Chamonix and a delivery full of emotion, was commended by audiences and critics. Similar, it later received a Grammy for a pair's greatest national performance or vocal group in 1981, making it one of the highlights of Orbison's subsequent reflections and restating his status as an influential figure in American music. The pursuit was especially significant because it represented his triumphant entry into modern genres while remaining faithful to the tragic romanticism that had outlined his previous work. Orbison's resurgence reached even higher levels. Late in the 1980s when he rose to founding member of a rock band that most renowned supergroups, Thrillberries on the Road. This impulsive and a celebrity-studded partnership brought coming some of the most well-known names in history of rock, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, and George Harrison, with Orbison himself. The gang came together nearly accidentally when the musicians received collaborating to record Harrison's B-side and became aware of the enchanted cooperation between them. Orbison took on the alias Wilbur was left out of the group, a light-hearted nod to his idol and musical origins. Lefty Traveling, their debut album Volume 1, One by Wilbur, published in 1988, was both a commercial and critical year achievement, receiving positive evaluations and restoring Orbison's reputation on a worldwide scope. His input into the music and harmonies of the band brought warmth and richness to the group's music, and his performance on songs such as The World was reminded by Handle with Care that his extraordinary ability to sing the Stamia Orbison enormous input to the music industry received official recognition. Possessing one of the highest recognition, his admission into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame during his induction, Bruce Springsteen's speech, who had frequently been, was recognized as one of his best reputed the singer's influences, distinctive voice, characterizing it as the of heartache. The distinction not only recognized Orbison's significant impact on the development of rock and pop songs, but further solidified his reputation as one of the most emotionally charged, creative, and resonant performers. In spite of the numerous personal and difficulties he had faced in his career. Orbison stood in the forefront of the height of his fame during his last years. Several years after his death in December 1988, Orbison's impact was still felt today and rejoiced. In 2014, to honor 25 years since the launch of his last studio Mystery Girl album, a deluxe version of the album was made available. Among the most poignant and noteworthy additions was a demo that has never been heard before, called The Way Is Affection. This song was created just heartbreaking because Orbison's Wesley Roy Jr. and Alex, the surviving sons, assisted in finishing it with the original vocal recording of the father. With the help of producer John, the song, which featured Jeff Lynne and Carter Cash, was changed into a sleek and ethereally lovely homage that connected the past, present, and Father Anson's future and legacy. The incorporation hand followers of The Way Is Love a new insight into Orbison's creative process and provided a heartfelt reminder of the hits. Music is everlasting. In 1957, Roy Orbison was 21 years old, married Claudette, his teenage sweetheart Freddie, an exceptionally attractive young 16-year-old woman who was at that time. Their brief love affair had grew swiftly, and in spite of Theo's disparity and the difficulties of Orbison's career as only getting started, was incredibly in love. Claudette turned into inspiration for Roy, influencing a number of his upcoming works. Like a lot of teenage love relationships, their tales was characterized by fervor and turbulence. However, they started establishing a shared existence, and their 3 sons were born to the union. Roy 1958 saw the birth of Dwayne Orbison. 1962 saw the birth of Anthony King Orbison, their youngest HOAs, born in 1965, that Roy was proud of and loved his family and fatherhood. Despite his professional on trips, he was frequently drawn away by demands as well as recording sessions. A tragedy occurred. The Orbison family with terrible going into effect in June 1966, the moment Claudette died in amateur bike mishap while traveling in Tennessee's Gallatin. She and Roy had recently reunited following a time of he was left by her abrupt death and separation, broken on an emotional level. The death of Claudette caused a profound gap in Orbison's life, both in terms of creativity and personal life. The loss only devastated him, but also his wife, and not only disturbed the emotional stability that he had succeeded in creating Athom in the midst of his rapidly rising celebrity. Her later on death would be memorialized in his Claudette is an eerie song that, while first written as an homage to her vitality and beauty, assumed a profoundly airy resonance in the decades that came after. As though one heartbreaking when tragedy wasn't enough, fate intervened. 2 years later, another devastating blow. In September of 1968, Roy was absent from performing in England. His 2 oldest sons, Anthony King and Roy Dwayne, died in a fire at their Hendersonville residence, home in Tennessee. The fire entirely consumed the land, and even if Wesley, Roy's youngest son, lived due to the fact that he was residing with his grandparents during that period, the death of his other 2 kids were almost intolerable. The grief was beyond comprehension. One individual well known for his heartfelt, depressing songs, currently available himself, experiencing the very anguish he so frequently sung about. His sorrow was profound, and he temporarily retreated from the spotlight, finding it difficult to come accepting the back-to-back disasters that had destroyed his family. A new chapter amid this sea of lost uttered when Barbara and Roy Orbison first met. Jacobs, a music executive who was born in Germany, while visiting the United Kingdom. They clicked right away and profoundly restorative for Roy. The couple got married. March 25, 1969 was a pivotal moment in his private life. Barbara added into a loving and stabilizing person for him. She not only supplied emotional assistance, but moreover took and actively participated in managing his career, especially in later life. They were devoted to each other and regard for one another, continuing throughout the epics and valleys of his comeback career. In the 1980s, Roy and Barbara had 2 sons, born Roy Kelton Orbison Jr. in 1970, who would subsequently continue in his following in his father's footsteps by participating throughout the music business, and Alexander, born in 1975. Alex Orbison is also developed into a vital part of maintaining and carrying on his father's legacy following his demise. Barbara stayed with Roy until his tragic death in 1988. Later in life, she dedicated her life to maintaining keeping his music and memory alive, supervising late releases, overseeing his property, and making certain that the globe would never ignore the man in the shadows, the soaring operatic and the song. During all of the difficulties Roy in his private life, Orbison was characterized by a deep fusion of sorrow, love, and tenacity and heritage, a narrative as poignant and enduring as the music he departed. For many years, Roy's admirers, among the most mysterious and extremely talented voices throughout his story rock and roll, have been perplexed by Theo's inconsistencies in his life, the catastrophes that appeared to come after him, and the nearly spectral presence he touted in spite of his notoriety. Using his jet dark sunglasses and black hair worn even on stage, as well as a voice that rose above octaves with unadulterated feelings and sensitivity, Orbison appeared to be an exposed wound concealed in plain view. However, a sense of mystery was always present, including his character. his individual challenges, particularly the profound sorrow that appeared to come from his music. People conjectured for years regarding the true meaning of the icon. Was it only a loss for you personally, sensitivity to art, or whatever darker? Now, following years of conjecture, research-based biographies which reveled private correspondence, as well as interviews with the curtain has protected those closest to him. Been lifted at last. However, instead of closing the gap, the reality that has emerged has shown itself to be extremely distinct and not the type of story that is in harmony with the many people's rosy recollection of the delicate balladeer. The core of the enigma is Thethi, the reason behind Orbison's life being overshadowed by such ongoing grief, and why his songs frequently appeared to anticipate or consider that sorrow before Orbiton took place. A lot of people chalk this up to coincidental or the traditional cliché of the demented artist. However, people close to Orbison, along with those from his early managerial group and a few distant relatives, have disclosed that Orbison endured severe untreated psychological injury that began with his early life. The trauma he not only disguised but also turned into a work of art, even as it quietly ate him up from inside. Most unsettling of all, according to recent studies and interviews, that his recognizable and earthly voice might have come at a very high price. As the Teto records discovered in Orbison's early health documents, he had a number of experimental sinus operations as a teenager to address a persistent breathing problem. Some people today think this actions taken during a period when at best, medical ethics were unclear, having unintentionally changed his voice structure, leading to the distinct range that was nearly operatic and made him renowned. Although this provided the globe with some of these songs with the strongest emotional resonance of all, such as Only the Lonely and Crying, he also developed chronic pain as a result, migraines, as well as long-term harm that could have had a part in his withdrawal nature, increasing the weight of the fact that Roy's personal information was characterized by an ostrich on a Shakespearean scale. His Claudette, the first wife, passed away in a terrible 1966 motorbike crash. 2 years later, his house caught fire in Tennessee's Hendersonville, satwo of his little boys' lives, while he went on a tour. Admirers have always admired Orbison's capacity to stay employed, in light of such an inconceivable loss, viewing his stern demeanor as emblem of power. However, recent discoveries out of his personal diaries, which have now partially released, depict a much more gloomy image. He was feeling demolished, largely reliant on prescription drugs as a coping mechanism, and had occasionally even considered quitting the entire music industry, or worse, taking his own life. Possibly the most depressing to realize that the return of Orbison in the late 1980s, prior to his untimely demise in 1988, wasn't the victorious return to contentment that seemed to be on their surface despite his participation in On the Road, and the album Mystery Girl returned him to the spotlight, according to people close to him, that he was experiencing severe fatigue, untreated cardiac conditions, and the enduring consequences of stress on even when he smiles in public appearances, as well as updated critical. Orbison was living off of borrowed funds. He knew it was time. He passed away from a heart attack at the age of 52, startled the world. However, for those who knew him well, it was the terrible end of a life that had been slowly falling apart. Ultimately, the enigma surrounding Roy Orbison has been resolved at last. However, the truth is not the stuff of reassuring myths. This is the tale of a man who provided through his soul through music, even while his own spirit was gradually disintegrating. This soaring voice, the dark eyes and backed shades, and the lines that are oozing with loss and desire. These weren't merely creative decisions. They were screams for assistance echoing for decades on Lino completely comprehended.